The first ship to join Kevin's unofficial fleet was an old mining vessel called the Second Chance. Its captain, Tom Davis, had fled the destroyed colony of Riverside with 40 families packed into cargo holds never meant for passengers. When he heard that Kevin Ross was organizing a defense force on Haven's Edge, he volunteered his ship immediately. "Sir, she is not much to look at," Tom said as he and Kevin walked around the battered vessel. "But her engines are solid, and her HULL can take a beating. More importantly, my crew knows what we are fighting for." Within 2 weeks, Kevin's ragtag fleet had grown to include 12 ships of various sizes and conditions. None of them were proper warships. They were converted cargo haulers, mining vessels, passenger transports, and even a luxury yacht whose owner had decided that comfort meant nothing if there was no civilization left to enjoy it. The crews were just as mixed. Discharged military officers served alongside civilian volunteers who had never fired a weapon in their lives. Mechanics worked next to former admirals. Teenagers too young for official military service trained beside veterans. Of a dozen campaigns, Amy Turner had appointed herself as Kevin's unofficial aide. She helped coordinate the refugee camps, carried messages between the ship crews, and somehow always seemed to know what needed to be done before anyone asked. Her grandfather Bill had recovered enough to help with communications, using his experience. As a former colonial administrator to keep track of supplies and personnel, "Mr. Ross," Amy said one morning as Kevin reviewed tactical reports in his makeshift headquarters, "the new people want to know what we are going to call ourselves." Kevin looked up from his data pad. "Call ourselves? The fleet?" "Every military unit has a name, right? It's a colonial defense force, the frontier guard, stuff like that. What are we?" Kevin had been so focused on the practical details of organizing their defense that he had not thought about names or titles. "What do you think we should call ourselves, Amy?" The girl considered seriously. "Oh, we are not really official military anymore, and we are not just from one colony or one planet. We are people who decided to fight back when everyone else gave up." She paused, then smiled. "Maybe we are just the Hope Fleet." The name stuck. Within days, every ship in their small armada was flying banners marked with the simple words, "Hope." Fleet, along with whatever symbols meant the most to their crews. Some chose religious crosses or crescents. Others displayed the flags of their homeworlds. A few created entirely new designs that represented their personal beliefs about what they were fighting for. Word of the Hope Fleet spread across human space faster than official news channels. The story was too good for journalists to ignore. Kevin Ross, the disgraced former commander, building an impossible alliance of misfits and refugees to fight back against overwhelming odds. Some news reports mocked the effort as the desperate gesture of a broken man. Others treated it as an inspiring example of human courage. Admiral Lisa Grant watched the reports from her command center on Luna Base with mixed feelings. Part of her was angry that Kevin was operating outside all military authority. Another part of her envied him for the freedom to act according to his conscience instead of political requirements. "Ma'am," Colonel Jim Hayes said, approaching her. With a worried expression, "We have a problem. 3 more Colonial Defense Force units have requested transfers to frontier duty. When we denied the requests, they resigned and headed for Haven's Edge." Admiral Grant sighed. "How many does that make total?" 47 ships and approximately 8,000 personnel have left official service to join Kevin's operation. Foresee. Admiral Grant could respond. Her communications officer interrupted. "Ma'am, we have incoming priority signals from multiple systems. The Zephyrian fleet is moving." The tactical display lit up with red warning markers as Zephyrian battlegroups converged on a single target, Haven's Edge. War Prime Nexalar had decided that Kevin Ross and his Hope fleet represented a threat that needed to be eliminated before it could spread further. Kevin received the warning 30 minutes before the enemy arrived. His small fleet was outnumbered 50-1, outgunned by an even larger margin, and consisted mostly of ships that had never been designed for combat. Any rational military analysis would conclude that resistance was impossible. Jake Miller said over the communication channel, "We have 17 ships ready for battle, and maybe 3,000 people who know how to fire a weapon. The Zephyrians have a full battle fleet with enough firepower to glass the entire planet." Kevin stood on the bridge of his flagship. converted cargo hauler that had been renamed the New Dawn. Through the viewports, he could see the other ships of the Hope Fleet taking defensive positions around Haven's Edge. None of them were running. None of them were asking for evacuation orders. "Jake," Kevin said calmly, "do you remember what I told Colin Barrett during that interview?" "Which part, sir?" "The part about how faith teaches us that love is stronger than hate, truth is more powerful than lies, and good will ultimately triumph over evil." Captain Miller was quiet for a moment. "Yes, sir. I remember." "Do you believe it?" Another pause. "Yes, sir, I do." "Then we fight not because we think we can win, but because fighting is the right thing to do." The Zephyrian fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 50 warships arranged in a classic battle line, their weapons charged and their shields at maximum strength. Warprime Dexler expected the human ships to either flee or surrender. Immediately when faced with such overwhelming force, instead, something happened that no Zephyrian tactical manual had ever considered. The human ships began to broadcast on all frequencies, and the transmissions were not surrender requests or pleas for mercy. They were messages of hope. "This is Kevin Ross of the Hope Fleet," came the first transmission. "To all human colonies within range of this signal, do not give up. Do not surrender. Remember who you are and what you are fighting for." Other ships joined in. Captain Miller spoke about the importance of protecting the innocent. Beth Taylor talked about the duty to stand up for what is right, even when the odds are impossible. Tom Davis shared a simple message about how ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they worked together. But the transmission that changed everything came from Amy Turner. Her young voice carried across space with a clarity that cut through all the noise of war and politics and fear. "My name is Amy Turner," she said. "I am 10 years old. The Zephyrians killed my parents and destroyed my home. They think that makes me weak. They think that makes all of us weak, but they are wrong. We are not weak because we love each other. We are not weak because we have hope. We are not weak because we believe that good things are worth fighting for. We are strong because of all those things, and we are going to show them what human strength really looks like." Across human space, people stopped what they were doing to listen to a child who had lost everything but still believed that tomorrow could be better than today. In homes and offices, on ships and space stations, in the corridors of government buildings, in the command centers of military bases, humans remembered something they had almost forgotten. They remembered that they were the species that had traveled to the stars not for conquest or profit, but because they believed that the universe was big enough for everyone to find their place in it. They remembered that they were the people who had turned enemies into allies through patience and understanding. They remembered that they were humans, and that being human meant never giving up hope. The battle that followed was recorded by dozens of news drones. It became the most watched event in galactic history. The outcome was never really in doubt. The Hope Fleet fought with a courage that inspired songs and legends. But 17 converted civilian ships could not defeat 50. The Zephyrian warships through bravery alone. What made the difference was what happened next. As the Hope Fleet made its final, desperate charge against impossible odds, other ships began to appear. Colonial Defense Force vessels whose crews had mutinied against orders to stay in defensive positions. Civilian transports carrying volunteers who had armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find. Even alien ships from species that had been inspired by Amy Turner's message. The reinforcements kept coming until the Zephyrian fleet found itself facing not 17 ships but over 300. Warprime Dexler had planned to destroy humanity's hope by crushing Kevin Ross and his followers. Instead, he had given that hope a chance to shine so brightly that it attracted every soul in the galaxy who still believed that good was worth fighting for. The battle ended with the complete destruction of the Zephyrian fleet and the capture of Warprime Dexler himself. But more importantly, it ended with humanity united again around the simple truth that Kevin Ross had spoken in a television interview, that faith, hope, and love were not weaknesses to be hidden, but strengths to be celebrated. Kevin Ross returned to Earth not as a conquering hero, but as a reminder that the greatest victories are won not by superior weapons or clever tactics, but by the courage to stand up for what is right, even when standing alone. The galaxy had learned that humans were dangerous not because they were warriors, but because they were believers. And in the end, that made all the difference. Haven's Edge was exactly what its name suggested, the last habitable world before the vast emptiness of unexplored space. The air was thin but breathable, the gravity slightly heavier than Earth normal, and the weather unpredictable enough to kill the careless. Most of the colonists were people who had nowhere else to go, failed miners, discharged soldiers, refugees from worlds that no longer existed. Kevin Ross arrived on a cold morning when the twin suns were hidden behind thick gray clouds. The spaceport was little more than a concrete pad with a small building that served as customs, immigration, and baggage claim all in one room. The immigration officer, a tired-looking woman named Carol White, stamped his papers without looking up. "Welcome to paradise," she said dryly. "Try not to die in your first week. It makes paperwork complicated." Kevin found lodging in a small apartment above a repair shop in the settlement's main street. The rent was cheap because the building shook. Every time a ship landed at the spaceport, its landlord, an old mechanic named Pete Adams, helped him carry his single bag upstairs. "You are the famous Kevin Ross, aren't you?" Pete asked, as they reached the small apartment. "Saw your interview on the news feeds. Caused quite a stir." Kevin nodded. "I suppose it did." Pete studied him for a moment. "Good for you, standing up like that. Takes guts to tell the truth when nobody wants to hear it." Kevin settled into his new life quietly. He found work helping to repair the atmospheric processors that kept the colony's air breathable. The work was hard and dirty, but it was honest. His neighbors slowly accepted him as just another exile, trying to make a new start on the edge of nowhere. What Kevin did not know was that his exile had been carefully observed by intelligence agents working for the Zephyrian Empire. Warprime Nexler had been studying human psychology and warfare patterns for 3 years, preparing for what he believed would be the final conflict between their species. Nexler was not like the previous Zephyrian leaders who had underestimated humanity's fighting spirit. He understood that humans were most dangerous when they believed they were fighting for something important. The peace treaty that Kevin Ross had negotiated had been a temporary setback, nothing more. Now, Dexelar saw an opportunity to strike at humanity's greatest weakness, their tendency to turn on their own heroes. The Warprime's flagship. The Bone Render hung in the darkness between star systems while he planned his new campaign. Unlike previous Apharian attacks that had focused purely on military targets, this assault would be designed to break human morale completely. Report, Dexelar commanded his intelligence chief, a scarred veteran named Kexaval, who had spent 2 years undercover on human worlds. Kexaval activated a holographic display showing the current state of human space. "The exile of Kevin Ross has created exactly the division we hoped for. The human leadership is focused on maintaining their secular image to alien species. Their common people are confused and divided about what their civilization truly stands for." Dexelar studied the display with satisfaction. Red markers showed the locations of human colonies, military bases, and industrial centers. But more importantly, green markers showed the locations of schools, hospitals, and religious buildings. "Phase 1 of the operation is ready to begin," Kexaval continued. "Our advanced scouts have identified the primary targets in each system. We will strike simultaneously across a 40-light-year front." "And the human response?" Dexelar asked. "Admiral Lisa Grant has restructured their defensive positions according to standard tactical doctrine. They expect us to attack military installations and major population centers. They are not prepared for our actual strategy." Dexelar allowed himself a rare smile. Previous Zephyrian campaigns had failed because they had tried to match human military might with superior numbers and technology. But humans had always found ways to overcome those advantages through superior coordination and unbreakable morale. This time would be different. This time Nexelar would attack the source of human strength itself. "Begin the assault," he ordered. The first attacks came without warning. Zephyrian strike forces appeared simultaneously in 12 different star systems, but instead of targeting military bases or government centers, they focused on what humans called soft targets. Schools full of children were bombed from orbit. Hospitals treating wounded colonists were destroyed by precision strikes. Churches, temples, and community centers were reduced to rubble by weapons that left the surrounding areas untouched. Admiral Grant received the first reports in her command center on Luna Base. The tactical displays showed Zephyrian forces appearing throughout human space, but their attack pattern made no sense according to any military doctrine she understood. "Why are they targeting civilian infrastructure?" Colonel Jim Hayes asked, staring at the incoming damage reports. "There is no strategic value in destroying a school or a medical clinic." Admiral Grant felt a cold certainty settle in her stomach. "They are not trying to destroy our infrastructure. They are trying to destroy our will to fight." The attacks continued for 72 hours. Zephyrian forces would appear, strike their chosen targets with devastating precision, then disappear before human defense forces could respond. The casualty reports were horrific, not because of the numbers, but because of who was being killed. Teachers, doctors, nurses, clergy, and anyone else who represented hope and healing in human communities. But the psychological warfare did not stop with the bombing campaigns. The Therian propaganda broadcasts began appearing on human communication networks. It's delivered in perfect human languages by speakers who understood exactly how to wound their audience most deeply. "Humans," the broadcast said, "your leaders have abandoned the beliefs that once made you strong. Your greatest military hero has been exiled for speaking about faith. Your civilization has chosen political correctness over courage, compromise over conviction. You are no longer the species that once defied impossible odds. You have become weak, divided, and ashamed of your own heritage." The broadcasts played continuously on hijacked communication channels, accompanied by images of the destroyed schools and hospitals. The message was clear. Humanity had lost its way, and the Zephyrians were simply putting a dying civilization out of its misery. Admiral Grant watched the reports pour in from across. Colonial Defense Force units were scrambling to respond to the attacks, but they were always one step behind their enemies. More troubling were the reports from the colonies themselves. Instead of rallying together as humans had always done in times of crisis, many communities were fragmenting under the psychological pressure. "The Outer Rim colonies are requesting immediate evacuation," Colonel Hayes reported. "They say they cannot defend against an enemy that refuses to fight fair." "Since when do we evacuate colonies?" Admiral Grant demanded. "Since we stopped believing that we had anything worth fighting for," Hayes replied quietly. The comment hung in the air like an accusation. Admiral Grant had served humanity for 30 years, fought in 6 major conflicts, and never once questioned whether their cause was just. But now, as she watched the systematic destruction of everything that gave human civilization meaning, she began to understand what Kevin Ross had been trying to tell them. The enemy was not attacking their bodies or their military installations. The enemy was attacking their souls, and without Kevin Ross to remind them who they were supposed to be, humanity was losing a war they did not even realize they were fighting. On Haven's Edge, Kevin Ross watched the news reports with growing alarm. The young colony had no strategic importance, so the Zephyrians had ignored it completely. But every day brought fresh refugees from worlds that had been abandoned to the enemy advance. As Kevin helped the newcomers find shelter and food, he began to hear the same story over and over again. Human defense forces were still strong there. Weapons still worked, their ships could still fight. But something had gone out of the people themselves. The spark that had always made humans dangerous when cornered had somehow been extinguished. Kevin Ross understood exactly what had happened. The question was whether there was still time to relight the fire that had once made humanity unstoppable. The refugee ship arrived at Haven's Edge on a Tuesday morning under heavy gray clouds. It was an old cargo vessel never meant to carry passengers, packed with 300 survivors from the mining colony of New Denver. The ship's captain, a grizzled veteran named Roy Banks, had pushed his engines beyond safe limits to stay ahead of the Zephyrian advance. Kevin Ross was working on atmospheric processor number 7 when he heard the ship's distress beacon. He dropped his tools and ran toward the spaceport along with most of the other colonists. Haven's Edge had received refugee ships before, never one this badly damaged or carrying so many people. The ship touched down hard, one landing gear. completely destroyed and smoke pouring from its rear engines. Kevin helped organize the evacuation while the colony's single doctor, an elderly woman named Mary Jones, triaged the wounded. Most of the refugees were physically unharmed, but showed the hollow-eyed stare of people who had seen their world destroyed. Among the last to leave the ship was a small group that moved more slowly than the others. Kevin noticed them because one appeared to be supporting another who was having trouble walking. As they came closer, he saw that it was a young girl, maybe 10 years old, helping an injured man who looked old enough to be her grandfather. The girl had blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail and wore clothes that had once been clean but were now stained with smoke and dust. Her eyes held a sadness that no child should carry, but there was something else there too. A determination that reminded Kevin of soldiers he had known who refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. "Sir, do you need help?" asked the injured man. The girl looked up at him with sharp blue eyes. "Are you Kevin Ross?" Kevin was surprised. "Yes, I am." "How did you know?" "My dad showed me your picture once. He said you were the best commander in the fleet." The girl's voice was steady, but Kevin could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. "My name is Amy Turner. This is my grandfather, Bill Turner. Our colony was attacked 3 days ago." Kevin knelt down so he was at Amy's eye level. "Where are your parents, Amy?" "They stayed behind to help other people evacuate. The Zephyrians came back before the last ship could leave." Amy's voice broke slightly on the last words, but she quickly controlled herself. "Grandpa got hurt when the school was hit. I helped him get to the refugee ship." Kevin felt something twist in his chest. He had seen war orphans before, but something about this particular girl's quiet courage reminded him of why he had joined the military in the first place. "You did a brave thing, Amy. Your parents would be proud of you." Amy looked at him seriously. "Mr. Ross, why did they attack the school?" "There were no soldiers there, no weapons, just kids and teachers." It was the question that had been haunting Kevin since the Zephyrian campaign began. He'd studied the attack patterns and understood their purpose, but explaining it to a 10-year-old girl who had lost everything was almost impossible. "Sometimes people attack what they fear most," Kevin said carefully. "The Zephyrians are afraid of what makes humans strong." "What makes us strong?" Amy asked. Kevin thought about all the official answers he could give. Superior technology, better tactics, stronger industrial base, more advanced weapons. All the things that military academies taught and politicians repeated in their speeches. None of them were true. "Hope," Kevin said finally. "We are strong because we never stop hoping that things can get better." Amy considered this for a moment. "Is that why you told everyone about God on that TV show? Because hope comes from God?" Kevin was startled. "You saw that interview?" "Everyone saw it. My dad said you were brave to tell the truth even when people did not want to hear it." Amy paused, then asked the question that cut straight to Kevin's heart. "Mr. Ross, why are not you helping us fight back?" The simple words hit Kevin harder than any weapon ever had. He looked at this girl who had lost her parents, her home, and everything she had ever known. It still believed that someone could make things better. He thought about all the refugees he had helped over the past few weeks, all the stories of colonies abandoned and people fleeing in terror. "Amy," Kevin said slowly, "I was told that I could not be a soldier anymore." "By who?"
"By
"The people in charge of the military." Amy frowned. "But you are still you, right? You still know how to fight? You still want to help people?" Kevin stared at her. In all the complicated political discussions and military tribunals and media debates, no one had asked such a simple question. He was still Kevin Ross. His knowledge had not been erased. His experience had not vanished. His desire to protect innocent people had not changed. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am still me." "Then why do you need permission from other people to do what is right?" The question hung in the air between them. Kevin realized that for months he had been thinking like a discharged military officer. Instead of thinking like a human being who saw others in danger, he had been waiting for someone in authority to give him permission to help, when the only permission he really needed was his own conscience. Over the next few days, as Kevin helped the refugees settle into temporary housing, Amy's question kept echoing in his mind. He watched the news feeds showing the Zephyrian advance continuing unchecked. He listened to the stories of more colonies being evacuated, more communities giving up without a fight. But he also noticed something else. The refugees who came to Haven's Edge were not just running away from the enemy. They were seeking something they had lost. They talked about Kevin's interview, about his willingness to stand up for his beliefs despite the consequences. Some of them had traveled to Haven's Edge specifically because they had heard he was their captain. Jake Miller arrived on Thursday with a small group of discharged soldiers who had requested transfers to frontier duty rather than serve under the new command structure. Commander Beth Taylor came 2 days later with a damaged patrol ship and a crew of volunteers who had officially resigned from the Colonial Defense Force. "Sir," Captain Miller said when he found Kevin working on a water purification plant, "we need to talk." Kevin looked up from his work to see not just Miller, but Taylor and a dozen other officers he recognized. They were still wearing their uniforms, but their insignia had been removed, just as Kevin had removed his during the interview. "What can I do for you, Jake?" Kevin asked. "It is not what you can do for us, sir. It is what we can do together." Miller gestured toward the refugee camps that now surrounded the original colony. "There are 3,000 people here who have nowhere else to go. More ships arrive every day. And out there, the Zephyrians are destroying everything that makes human civilization worth defending." Beth Taylor stepped forward. "The official military response has been a disaster. They are fighting yesterday's war while the enemy attacks everything we actually care about. We need a different approach." Kevin felt something stirring inside. Him that he had not felt since his exile began. Not anger or ambition, but purpose. "What are you suggesting?" "We are suggesting that maybe it is time to stop waiting for permission," Jake Miller said. "These people need leadership. The colonies need hope. And somewhere out there, humanity needs someone to remind them who they used to be." Kevin looked around at the faces watching him. These were good people who had given up their careers too. Follow their conscience. Behind them, he could see Amy Turner helping her grandfather walk to the medical center. Beyond the refugee camps, he could see the edge of known space where countless other worlds waited in fear. "If we do this," Kevin said slowly, "there is no going back. We will be operating outside all official authority. We will have no support, no reinforcements, no backup plans." "We understand, sir," Beth Taylor said. "But we also understand that sometimes doing the right thing means doing it alone." Kevin Ross looked up at the gray sky of Haven's Edge and made his decision. "Then we stop running, and we start fighting back." The interview ended with Colin Barrett looking like he had been struck by lightning. Kevin Ross walked off the set with his medals in his pocket and his head held high. Within minutes, the video clips were spreading across the galactic communication network faster than anyone had expected. By the time Kevin reached his quarters on New Horizon Station, his personal communicator was buzzing with dozens of urgent messages. Admiral Lisa Grant was the first to call. Her face appeared on Kevin's screen with an expression that could have frozen plasma. She had been Kevin's commanding officer for 8 years, and they had worked together through some of the most difficult campaigns in human history. Now she looked at him like he was a stranger. "What in the hell did you think you were doing out there?" she demanded without any greeting. "Do you have any idea what kind of damage you just caused?" Kevin sat down at his small desk and looked at her calmly. "I told the truth, Lisa. I thought that was still considered a good thing." "The truth?" Admiral Grant's voice rose dangerously. "Kevin, you just told 2 billion people that your military decisions are based on religious faith. Instead of sound tactical judgment, do you understand what that does to confidence in the Colonial Defense Force?" "My faith guides my judgment," Kevin replied. "It does not replace it. There is a difference." Admiral Grant rubbed her temples like she was fighting a headache. "Interstellar Council is already demanding explanations. 3 different alien ambassadors have contacted me in the last hour asking if humanity's military leadership is compromised by primitive beliefs. Senator Paul Dixon wants your head on a platter." Kevin was not surprised. Senator Dixon had been pushing for a more secular approach to human government for years. He believed that religion was holding humanity back from its full potential in the galactic community. What do you want me to do, Lisa? Kevin asked. I want you to fix this, Admiral Grant said sharply. I call a press conference. Explain that you were tired, that you spoke carelessly. Say that your personal beliefs do not affect your professional duties. Give us something to work with here. Kevin was quiet for a long moment. Through his small window, he could see Earth, turning slowly below them. Somewhere down there, his wife Sarah was probably watching the news coverage. She would understand why he had done what he did. She had lived with his faith as long as she had lived with him. I cannot do that, Kevin, said finally. Admiral Grant stared at him. Cannot or will not. Both. The connection ended abruptly. Kevin sat back in his chair and closed his eyes. He had known this moment would come eventually. He had spent years walking a careful line between his public duties and his private beliefs. The interview had simply forced him to choose which side of that line he would stand on. His communicator buzzed again. This time it was Senator Dixon himself, his thin face twisted with anger.
Right.
Ross, you have single-handedly set back human-alien relations by 50 years. The Kethmore ambassador just informed me that his species is reconsidering their trade agreements with humanity. They do not want to deal with what they called religious fanatics. Kevin felt a flash of real anger for the first time since the interview ended. The Kethmori practice ritual sacrifice of their own children. Senator, I find it interesting that they would question anyone else's beliefs. That is exactly the kind of attitude that is going to destroy us, Senator Dixon snapped. We cannot afford to alienate our allies because you want to play missionary to the galaxy. I am not playing anything, Kevin said quietly. I am simply being honest about who I am. The calls continued for hours. Government officials, military commanders, journalists, and politicians all wanted to know the same thing. Why had Kevin Ross chosen to destroy his career over a religious interview question? Some were angry, some were confused, and a few were genuinely curious about his motivations, but not all the calls were hostile. Captain Jake Miller, who had served under Kevin during the Titan Ridge campaign, called to offer his support. Sir, I just wanted you to know that there are a lot of us who understand what you did today. It took courage. Commander Beth Taylor, who had lost her leg in the Battle of New Mars, sent a simple message. Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like. By the end of the day, it became clear that the galaxy was splitting into two camps. Political and military leadership were united in their condemnation of Kevin's actions. But among the common soldiers, the colonists, and the ordinary people who kept human civilization running, there was a different reaction entirely. News reports from across human space showed crowds gathering to discuss the interview. In some places, people were angry and demanded that Kevin be stripped of his rank immediately. But in others, particularly on the frontier worlds where life was hard and death was always close, people nodded their heads and said they finally understood why Kevin Ross had always seemed different from other commanders. Admiral Grant called again 3 days later. This time, she looked tired instead of angry. Kevin, I have been ordered to give you one final chance. The Secretary of Defense is willing to let this whole thing blow over if you will simply retire quietly. Take your pension, go home to your wife, write your memoirs. No one has to know that you were forced out. Kevin considered the offer. It would be easy to accept. He could go home to Sarah, tend his garden, and watch the news from a comfortable distance. He had served his time, earned his rest. What about my current assignments? He asked. Colonel Jim Hayes will take over the Frontier Defense Initiative. Major Bob King will handle the Zephyrian Cultural Exchange Program. Kevin knew both men well. They were competent officers who would do their jobs adequately. But they did not understand the frontier worlds the way he did. They had not lived. Among the colonists who scratched out their existence on hostile planets light years from Earth. And if I refuse your generous offer? Admiral Grant's expression hardened again. Then you will be court-martialed for conduct unbecoming an officer. Your pension will be forfeit. You will be dishonorably discharged and banned from all military installations. Kevin nodded slowly. I understand. Kevin, please, Admiral Grant said. And for a moment she sounded like the friend she had been for so many years, instead of his commanding officer. Do not throw your life away over this. You have done great things for humanity. Do not let it end like this. Kevin smiled sadly. Lisa, my life is not ending. It is just beginning a new chapter. Court-martial proceedings began the following week. Kevin Ross was charged with conduct unbecoming an officer, failure to maintain military discipline, and bringing discredit upon the Colonial Defense Force. The trial was held in secret, but news of it leaked to the public almost immediately. The verdict was never in doubt. Kevin was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to immediate discharge from the service. He was stripped of his rank, his pension, and his right to live on any world under direct military protection. 3 days after the court-martial ended, Kevin Ross boarded a transport ship bound for Haven's Edge, a barely terraformed world on the very edge of human space. It was a place where failures and outcasts went to disappear from galactic civilization. He carried only a single bag of personal belongings and the medal that had meant the most to him, a simple cross that Sarah had given him on their wedding. Day. As the transport ship pulled away from New Horizon Station, Kevin looked back at the gleaming orbital platform where his military career had ended. He felt no bitterness, no regret. He had made his choice with full knowledge of the consequences. What he did not know was that his choice would soon change the course of galactic history. The moment stretched between them like a bridge that could either connect or collapse. Kevin Ross looked at Colbert for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 3 seconds. In control rooms across human space, producers leaned forward in their chairs. Viewers who had been casually watching while eating dinner suddenly gave the screen their full attention. Kevin's hands rested calmly on the small interview table. His wedding ring caught the studio lights, a simple gold band that he had worn for 23 years. His wife Sarah had given it to him the day before he shipped out for his first deep space assignment. She had made him promise to come back to her, and he had kept that promise through 12 major battles and countless smaller conflicts. Colin waited for an answer, his smile still perfectly in place. He had asked the question with the casual confidence of someone who was used to being agreed with. After all, who would want to appear unreasonable on galactic television? Who would choose to seem backward and primitive in front of 2 billion viewers? Kevin Ross stood up. The movement was so unexpected that Colin actually blinked in surprise. Guests simply did not stand up during Barrett Tonight interviews. It violated the carefully choreographed nature of the show, the civilized atmosphere that Colin had spent years perfecting. Kevin reached up and began to remove the medals from his chest. One by one, he unclipped them with steady fingers and placed them on the table between himself and Colin. The silver star made a small metallic sound as it touched the table's surface. The Cross of Valor followed, then the campaign medal from the Outer Rim conflicts, then the Purple Heart he had earned when Zephyrian torture had left permanent scars across his back. "What are you doing?" Colin asked, his professional composure finally showing cracks. Kevin removed his commander's insignia next. The 3 silver stars that marked his rank in the Colonial Defense Force. He set them down gently with the rest of his decorations. When he was finished, he looked directly into the main camera, instead of at Colin. "My name is Kevin Ross," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the studio's perfect acoustics. "I am 45 years old. I've served humanity for 24 years in the Colonial Defense Force. I have commanded 17 different ships and led men and women into battle more times than I can count." Colin tried to regain control of his show. "Commander, I think there's been a misunderstanding." Kevin held up one hand, still looking at the camera. "Please let me finish." There was something in his voice that made Colin fall silent immediately. It was not anger or aggression. It was simply the voice of a man who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. "You asked me to hide my faith," Kevin continued. "You suggested that my beliefs are primitive, that they might confuse young people who look up to me. You wanted me to keep quiet about the most important thing in my life." He paused, and for the first time since the interview began, he smiled. It was not Colin's practiced television smile. It was something real and warm and completely genuine. "I cannot do that," Kevin said. Across human space, people found themselves leaning forward in their chairs, In military bases, in civilian colonies, in the corridors of government buildings, in the common rooms of mining stations, screens flickered with the image of a man who was about to say something that would change everything. Something I hide from, Kevin said. It is something I live by. It has carried me through the darkest moments of my life. When I was captured by the Zephyrians and spent 3 years in their prison camps, it was my faith that kept me sane. When I watched good soldiers die in battles that seemed hopeless, it was my faith that reminded me that their sacrifice had, meaning Colbert had conducted thousands of interviews, but he had never experienced anything like this. The man standing across from him radiated a kind of quiet strength that seemed to fill the entire studio. Viewers who had tuned in, expecting entertainment, found themselves witnessing something much more powerful. When I negotiated the peace treaty with the Zephyrian Empire, Kevin continued, it was not military strategy that made the difference. It was the simple recognition that every living being, human or alien, has value. That idea does not come from science or politics or military doctrine. It comes from faith. It comes from believing that we are all part of something larger than ourselves. Kevin finally looked away from the camera and met Colin's eyes directly. You want to know what makes me different? What allows me to see hope where others see darkness? It is not some special skill or talent. It is the absolute certainty that love is stronger than hate, that truth is more powerful than lies, and that good will ultimately triumph over evil. The studio was completely silent now. Even the technical crew had stopped moving. Camera operators who had filmed thousands of shows found their hands trembling slightly as they held their equipment steady. I have seen things that would break most people, Kevin said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I have faced enemies who wanted nothing more than to destroy everything I hold dear. I have made decisions that cost lives and carried burdens that no one should have to bear. Through all of it, my faith has been my anchor. It has reminded me who I am and what I am fighting for. Colin tried one more time to regain control. But surely you can understand that in our modern age, Kevin interrupted gently, is no different from any other age in the fundamental questions that matter. People still wonder why they exist. They still search for meaning and purpose. They still need something to believe in that is bigger than their own immediate concerns. Kevin picked up his commander's insignia from the table and held it in his palm. These symbols represent the trust that humanity has placed in me. They represent years of service and sacrifice, but they are not who I am. They are simply what I do. He put the insignia back down and looked directly at Colin. My faith is who I am. It shapes every decision I make, every word I speak, every action I take. You ask me to hide it, to pretend it does not matter. That would be like asking me to stop breathing. The silence stretched on until Colin realized that Kevin was finished speaking. The host looked down at the table full of military decorations and back up at the man who had just voluntarily given up one of the most powerful positions in human space rather than compromise his beliefs. I think we need to take a commercial break, Colin said weakly. Kevin shook his head. No, Colin. I think we need to finish this conversation. The blue lights of the recording studio cast long shadows across the curved walls of the New Horizon station, high above the Earth. The massive orbital platform hummed with activity as millions of people across human space prepared to watch the most popular interview show in the galaxy. Colin Barrett adjusted his tie and looked across the small table at his guest. The man sitting opposite him had saved more lives than any other human in history, yet he seemed perfectly calm as the countdown began. Commander Kevin Ross wore his dress uniform with quiet dignity. The medals on his chest told stories that most people could only dream about. There was the Silver Star from the Battle of Titan Ridge, where he held off an entire Zephyrian squadron with just 3 damaged ships. The Cross of Valor from the Siege of New Mars, where he led a rescue mission that saved 10,000 civilians, and dozens of others. Each one representing moments when impossible became possible through sheer determination. Colin smiled. His famous smile as the red recording light came on. Good evening, and welcome to Barrett Tonight. I'm Colin Barrett, and we're broadcasting live from New Horizons Station to over 2 billion viewers across human space. He turned to his guest. Tonight we have Commander Kevin Ross, the man they call the Miracle Worker. Commander, thank you for joining us. Kevin nodded politely. Thank you for having me, Colin. The interview started exactly as everyone expected. Colin asked about the recent peace treaty with the Zephyrian Empire. And Kevin explained how months of careful negotiation had finally ended the war that had claimed millions of lives. He spoke about the importance of understanding your enemy, of finding common ground even with those who seemed completely alien. You single-handedly turned our greatest enemies into allies, Colin said, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. How does someone develop that kind of skill? That ability to see hope where others see only darkness? Kevin was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think every person has the capacity for hope, Colin. Sometimes we just need to remember what we're fighting for. But surely there's more to it than that, Colin pressed. Our viewers want to know what makes Kevin Ross tick. What drives you to keep going when everyone else has given up? Around the galaxy, people leaned closer to their screens. This was why they watched Barrett Tonight. Colin had a gift for getting his guests to reveal their deepest secrets, their most personal truths. Presidents, war heroes, scientists, artists, they all eventually opened up under his skillful questioning. Kevin looked down at his hands for a moment, then back up at Colin. I suppose my faith has always been important to me. Colin's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of personal detail his audience loved. Faith in humanity. Faith in the cause of peace. Faith in God, Kevin said simply. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. In the control room, the producer's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Across human space, conversations in living rooms and bars suddenly went quiet. Even the background hum of the space station seemed to pause. Colin recovered quickly, his professional smile never wavering. Well, that's interesting. Of course, we live in an age where science has answered so many questions that our ancestors could only wonder about. We've traveled to other stars, made contact with alien civilizations, unlocked the secrets of the universe itself. Yes, Kevin agreed. It's remarkable what we've accomplished. So surely you can understand, Colin continued, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, why some people might see religious beliefs as well outdated, primitive, even. Don't you think that clinging to ancient superstitions might actually hold us back as a species? Kevin felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had faced down alien war fleets, survived torture that would have broken most men, negotiated with beings whose thought processes were completely alien to human understanding. But somehow, this moment felt more dangerous than all of those combined. I wouldn't call my beliefs superstitions, he said carefully. Colin leaned back in his chair, sensing that he had found an interesting angle. But, Commander, you're a man of science. You understand physics, chemistry, biology. You've seen the vast emptiness of space, the random chaos of cosmic events. How do you reconcile that with belief in some kind of divine plan? The question was. Delivered with Colin's trademark mixture of intellectual curiosity and gentle mockery. It was the same tone he used when interviewing politicians about their failed policies or artists about their controversial work. Professional, polite, but with just enough edge to let everyone know that he considered himself the smarter person in the room. Kevin Ross had been asked similar questions before, usually by fellow officers who couldn't understand how someone so rational in military matters could believe in something they couldn't measure or analyze. He had always deflected, changed the subject, found ways to avoid the conversation. It was easier that way, safer. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the way Colin had said primitive. Maybe it was the knowing smile, the assumption that any intelligent person would naturally abandon their faith once they understood enough about the universe. Or maybe it was simply that Kevin was tired of pretending to be someone he wasn't. "You know, Colin," Kevin said, his voice still calm but somehow carrying more weight than before, "I've seen a lot of impossible things in my career. I've watched soldiers fight with courage that defied every rational calculation. I've seen enemies choose mercy when revenge would have been easier. I've witnessed moments of grace and sacrifice that no scientific equation could predict or explain." Colin sensed that the interview was moving in an unexpected direction, but he pressed forward. "Surely you're not suggesting that divine intervention was responsible for your military victories?" "I'm suggesting," Kevin said, meeting Colin's eyes directly, "that there are more forces at work in this universe than most people want to acknowledge. And I'm suggesting that a man who doesn't know what he's fighting for is already beaten, no matter how many ships he commands or how advanced his weapons might be." The studio fell completely silent. In homes and bars across human space, people found themselves holding their breath without knowing why. Something was happening here, something that went beyond the usual celebrity interview format that they had come to expect. Colin Barrett had conducted thousands of interviews. Over his long career, he had developed an instinct for knowing when he had pushed someone too far, when it was time to back off and move to safer ground. Every instinct he possessed was telling him to change the subject now, to ask about Kevin's childhood or his plans for retirement. Instead, he leaned forward and smiled his most charming smile. "Commander Ross, surely you can see how your religious views ... might confuse young people who look up to you. Wouldn't it be better, as a public figure, to keep such personal beliefs private, to avoid sending the message that faith is more important than reason?"